He wasn't born into power. He earned it. Jimmy Hoffa came from working-class roots in Brazil, Indiana, born on February 14, 1913. His father died when he was just 7. By 14, he dropped out of school to help support the family. Life didn't offer Hoffa any shortcuts. He took every ounce of respect he ever got. He started organizing laborers in his teens. By age 20, he was already standing toe-to-toe with company men twice his age, demanding fair pay and safer conditions. But Hoffa didn't just talk tough, he delivered. He had that rare blend of charisma and steel. Workers loved him. Bosses feared him. In the 1930s, Hoffa joined the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, a union representing truck drivers and warehouse workers. At the time, the Teamsters were fragmented, corrupt, and weak. Hoffa helped change that. He built loyalty like a general in the field, making personal visits, handling disputes himself, memorizing names, birthdays, family details. He knew that real loyalty came from respect, not fear. But respect wasn't enough to take over the American labor scene. Hoffa made a deal with the devil. To grow the Teamsters, Hoffa forged alliances with the mafia. The mob wanted access to the Teamsters' growing pension fund, a pot of money worth hundreds of millions. In return, Hoffa got muscle. Strikebreakers disappeared. Rivals backed down. By the late 1950s, the Teamsters had become the largest union in America, and Hoffa, its most feared leader. He wasn't subtle about it. He reveled in the power. He dressed sharp, walked fast, and didn't blink. He negotiated with presidents and mobsters in the same breath. His name was synonymous with working-class strength and corruption. In 1957, Hoffa officially became president of the Teamsters. But it wasn't a clean transition. His predecessor, Dave Beck, had been forced out amid financial scandals. Hoffa swept in, filling the vacuum with raw energy. Under his leadership, membership exploded past 2 million. He secured historic contracts that guaranteed pensions, job protections, and health benefits. Things most American workers had never seen before. But the deals didn't come cheap. Hoffa used the Teamsters pension fund like a private bank. Hundreds of millions were funneled into mafia-connected projects. Casinos in Las Vegas, skyscrapers in Chicago, and trucking companies across the Rust Belt. The mob got rich, and Hoffa got untouchable. At least, for a while. Hoffa's meteoric rise drew attention from a powerful enemy, Robert F. Kennedy. As chief counsel for the Senate's McClellan Committee in the late 1950s, Kennedy made it his mission to expose organized labor corruption. And Jimmy Hoffa was target number 1. Their feud was personal, vicious, and very public. Kennedy called Hoffa the most dangerous man in America. Hoffa fired back, calling Kennedy a spoiled rich kid playing crusader. The hearings became national spectacle, televised showdowns that pitted 2 of America's most ambitious men against each other. Kennedy couldn't beat Hoffa in the courtroom, at least not yet. But he laid the groundwork. When JFK was elected president in 1960, he appointed Bobby as Attorney General. Now, Kennedy had the full force of the Justice Department, and he used it relentlessly. Still, Hoffa thrived. His popularity among Teamsters never wavered. His grip on power remained firm. But the walls were closing in, and Hoffa knew it. By the early 1960s, Jimmy Hoffa stood at the height of his power. He ran the most influential union in the country, oversaw billions in pension funds, and had forged a fearsome alliance with organized crime. But the storm was coming, and at its center was Robert F. Kennedy. Kennedy's vendetta against Hoffa wasn't just political, It was personal. He believed Hoffa had corrupted the heart of American labor. With the full backing of the Kennedy administration, the Justice Department went after Hoffa like never before. Dozens of FBI agents were assigned to his case. His phone was tapped, his movements tracked, his associates flipped. It became known inside the Bureau as the Get Hoffa Squad. And it worked. Slowly, painfully, but it worked. Hoffa was indicted multiple times in the early 60s. The first trial in 1962 ended in embarrassment for the government. A Tennessee jury found him not guilty of bribery and conspiracy. Hoffa walked out grinning. But Kennedy doubled down. They kept digging, kept pressuring informants, kept building cases. In 1964, 2 indictments finally stuck. The first came out of Nashville. Hoffa was accused of attempting to bribe a grand juror. The second, from Chicago, alleged that he had misused Teamsters pension funds for his own benefit, extending millions in loans to organized crime figures. The trials were brutal. Hoffa fought like a cornered animal, throwing every legal punch he had. He accused the government of persecution. He attacked Kennedy in the press. But behind the scenes, the noose was tightening. Witnesses began to flip. Paper trails emerged. Deals were uncovered that couldn't be explained away. The jury in the bribery trial took just a few hours. Hoffa was found guilty. He was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. The second trial, the pension fund misuse, tacked on 5 more. For the first time in his life, Jimmy Hoffa was behind bars. Not just under surveillance, not just under pressure. Caged. But Hoffa wasn't broken. He went to the Lewisburg Federal Penitentiary in Pennsylvania and kept scheming, kept organizing, kept trying to control the Teamsters from the inside. He believed he would be back, bigger than ever. He wasn't entirely wrong. Outside the prison walls, the Teamsters changed. Frank Fitzsimmons, Hoffa's longtime ally and vice president, took over as president. Hoffa expected Fitzsimmons to be a loyal caretaker until his return. But Fitzsimmons had his own ideas. He cozied up to the mob, protected his new power, and quietly closed the door behind Hoffa. By the early 70s, Hoffa was isolated. He wanted out, and he had a plan. In 1971, President Richard Nixon shocked the nation by commuting Hoffa's sentence. The move was politically calculated. Nixon wanted support from organized labor heading into the 1972 election, and Teamsters' endorsements carried weight. Hoffa was released after serving just 5 years. But the deal had a catch. Hoffa was banned from engaging in union activity until 1980. To Hoffa, that clause was an insult. He hadn't waited in prison just to be benched. He made it clear to everyone, Fitzsimmons, the Teamsters, and the Mafia, that he intended to return to power. He would run the union again. He would take back what was his. And that decision would get him killed. What Hoffa didn't fully grasp, or refused to accept, was how the world had changed during his time inside. Fitzsimmons had solidified his position. The Mafia had grown comfortable with the new leadership. The pension fund was flowing smoothly. The last thing they wanted was Hoffa storming back in, shaking things up, challenging old alliances. But Hoffa couldn't be convinced to step aside. He began speaking to reporters, writing a book, contacting old allies. He gave interviews saying the Mafia no longer scared him. He named names. He implied he had leverage. The FBI, of course, was still watching. And so was the mob. The union that Hoffa had built, once his empire, was now his battlefield. He was stepping into a war he couldn't win. Every move he made was watched. Every conversation repeated. Every word weighed like a threat. Still, Hoffa pushed forward. He arranged a meeting with two mobsters to discuss his return to power: Anthony Tony Jack Giacalone of Detroit and Anthony Tony Pro Provenzano of New Jersey. Both men were high-ranking mafia figures with deep Teamsters connections. Both had previously clashed with Hoffa, but he believed they could be reasoned with, or at least intimidated. That meeting was set for July 30th, 1975. It would be the last appointment Jimmy Hoffa ever made. Wednesday, July 30th, 1975. It was an ordinary summer day in suburban Detroit. Temperatures in the mid-80s, clear skies, traffic humming along Telegraph Road. But for Jimmy Hoffa, this day was anything but ordinary. It was the day he would finally confront the two men who stood between him and the power he believed still belonged to him: Tony Giacalone and Tony Provenzano. He woke up early, had breakfast, made several phone calls. He told friends and family he had a meeting scheduled at 2:00 p.m. at the Machis Red Fox restaurant in Bloomfield Township. He was specific, too specific for someone who had reason to be cautious. He told his wife, his driver, even his son. The meeting was with Tony Jack and Tony Pro. He made no secret of it, but something was off from the start. Neither Tony Jack nor Tony Pro had confirmed the meeting. In fact, they both later claimed they never intended to be there. Giacalone told authorities he was getting a haircut. Provenzano said he was miles away in New Jersey, with an alibi to back it up. But Hoffa was convinced it was happening. He even arrived early, pulled into the parking lot at 1:01 p.m., pacing, waiting. At 2:15 p.m., he called his wife from a nearby payphone. He was annoyed. "They're late," he told her. "They stood me up." That was the last anyone ever heard from Jimmy Hoffa. By 2:45 p.m., he was gone. No screams, no struggle, just gone. His car, a green 1974 Pontiac Granville, was found in the restaurant parking lot, unlocked. Inside were Hoffa's personal items: his watch, his union ID, even a full thermos. Everything looked untouched, but Hoffa had vanished. His family was immediately alarmed. His wife called their family friend Charles "Chucky" O'Brien, a longtime Hoffa associate who had been like a son to him. O'Brien was cagey. He claimed not to know anything. Later, he admitted he had been driving around in a car borrowed from a known mob associate, but said it had nothing to do with Hoffa's disappearance. The FBI launched one of the largest investigations in its history. Hundreds of agents were brought in. Witnesses were questioned. Airports, restaurants, and homes were searched. Leads poured in from across the country, but they all led nowhere. One witness reported seeing Hoffa get into a maroon Mercury Marquis Brougham, driven by three men, around 2:45 p.m. One of those men allegedly resembled Chucky O'Brien. The car matched the one O'Brien had borrowed that day, but no one could confirm what happened next. In the following days, the FBI searched fields, riverbanks, and mob hangouts. They found a few drops of blood in the back seat of the borrowed car, but no body, no murder weapon, no direct proof, and no confession. Theories multiplied. Some believed Hoffa was driven to a private home, possibly owned by a mob associate, murdered there, and his body either incinerated or hidden so well it would never be found. Others said he was taken to a meatpacking plant, where he was ground up and destroyed. One anonymous tip said he was buried under a football stadium. Another claimed he was dumped in a steel drum and sunk in the Great Lakes. The truth, however, was much simpler and darker. The FBI came to believe that Hoffa was lured to the restaurant under the pretense of a meeting, picked up by trusted associates, likely including Chucky O'Brien, and driven to a second location where he was killed quickly and efficiently. His body was then disposed of in a method that left no trace. It was a classic mafia hit: clean, professional, permanent. But the mystery didn't end with Hoffa's murder. The real mystery was the silence. No one talked. No deathbed confessions. No turncoats with secret tapes. The code of omerta, mafia silence, held strong, even as decades passed. The men most likely involved, Giacalone, Provenzano, O'Brien, all denied knowing anything. Most of them are now dead. In 1982, 7 years after his disappearance, Jimmy Hoffa was officially declared dead by the state of Michigan. His family never held a funeral. No grave was dug, no headstone etched. His story didn't end. It only became legend. To this day, Jimmy Hoffa remains one of the most famous missing persons in American history. His disappearance turned into a national obsession. Countless books, documentaries, and films have tried to solve the puzzle. But the truth is, the answer was likely known by only a small group of men who had everything to gain by keeping it a secret. Men who knew that Hoffa was never going to stop trying to come back. And that was the problem. He couldn't be controlled. He couldn't be threatened. And he couldn't be ignored. So they erased him. In the hours following Jimmy Hoffa's disappearance, panic set in, not just in his family, but across the highest ranks of law enforcement and organized crime. Something seismic had happened, and everyone, FBI agents, union bosses, mobsters, knew that the world had just changed. The FBI launched an immediate investigation. They didn't treat this like a missing person case. They treated it like a murder. A high-profile, politically explosive, mob-connected assassination. But the Bureau had a problem. They had no body, no murder scene, and no willing witnesses. And worse, this was Hoffa. There were too many suspects. From the beginning, agents focused on a short list of names. Topping that list, Anthony Tony Pro Provenzano and Anthony Tony Jack Giacalone. Both were known mafia figures. Both had ties to the Teamsters, and both had clashed with Hoffa in the past. Provenzano, in particular, had a violent history. He once had a man's kneecaps shattered with a baseball bat over a union dispute. But when questioned, both mobsters had airtight alibis. Tony Jack said he'd been at a health club. Tony Pro said he was playing cards in New Jersey. Nobody broke. Then there was Chucky O'Brien, the man who'd been like a surrogate son to Hoffa. O'Brien had access to the Mercury Marquis Brougham, allegedly seen picking Hoffa up. The car was searched. Traces of blood and hair were found in the back seat, but forensic technology in 1975 was limited. No positive ID could be made. O'Brien denied everything. He said he had nothing to do with Hoffa's disappearance. And without a body, the FBI had no leverage to charge him. Still, the Bureau kept digging. They wiretapped phones, flipped minor mob figures, followed leads across state lines. Agents were dispatched to Florida, Las Vegas, New Jersey, anywhere the Teamsters' pension money had touched. Dozens of mafia members were questioned. Informants gave stories, some conflicting, some fantastical. One claimed Hoffa had been taken to a home in northwest Detroit, killed, and cremated in a mob-owned garbage incinerator. Another said he was crushed in a car compactor. Others insisted he was buried beneath concrete, first in Michigan, then New Jersey, then Illinois. One wild tip even suggested he was placed inside a steel drum and dropped into a swamp. None of it led anywhere conclusive. Still, the investigation never stopped. In 1976, the FBI created the Hoffa file, a massive dossier of all evidence, tips, and leads. It became one of the largest case files in the Bureau's history. Over the next 2 decades, new agents would inherit the file like a curse. They chased rumors of body dumps, secret tapes, long-forgotten mob homes. A few times they thought they were close. In 2003, authorities searched a backyard pool in Michigan based on a tip from a mob associate. Nothing. In 2006, a mob informant named Richard the Iceman Kuklinski claimed he was part of the hit. He said Hoffa was stabbed and stuffed into a 50-gallon drum. But Kuklinski was a known liar and already dying in prison. Again, nothing. In 2013, the FBI tore up a Detroit driveway. In 2017, they searched an Oakland County field. In 2020, they drilled beneath a Jersey City landfill. Every time headlines roared, Hoffa may be found. Every time they came up empty. The truth was always just out of reach. Why? Because this was no ordinary disappearance. This was a calculated erasure. Hoffa wasn't just killed, he was removed. Strategically, efficiently. The hit was likely approved at the highest levels of the mafia, possibly even sanctioned by the commission itself, the national governing body of organized crime. His return to power posed a risk. He was volatile, angry, and no longer controllable. Worse, he had threatened to expose mafia operations if they didn't support his comeback. To them, that was a death sentence. But despite knowing the motive, despite naming the suspects, despite decades of relentless investigation, the FBI could never close the case. In 1982, Hoffa was declared legally dead. His wife, Josephine, never recovered from the loss. She died 2 years later. Their son, James P. Hoffa, followed his father's path, eventually becoming president of the Teamsters himself. But even he never got the answers he wanted. The Hoffa family remained trapped in limbo, denied the dignity of a grave, the peace of closure, the comfort of truth. And still, the rumors never stopped. Some said the mafia dumped him in Lake Michigan. Others claimed his body was flown to Florida and fed to alligators. One theory even suggested he was incinerated in a trash compactor at a car factory in Hamtramck, Michigan. At one point, former mob hitman Frank Sheeran, immortalized in The Irishman, claimed to have killed Hoffa himself, shot him in a Detroit house, then helped cremate the body. But forensic testing in that home found no evidence. Sheeran's confession was disputed, even by the FBI. Over the years, the Hoffa case became more than a criminal investigation. It became American folklore, a symbol of how far power can stretch and how fast it can disappear, and how justice, no matter how long it's pursued, can still remain just out of reach. By the late 1990s, most of the original suspects in the Jimmy Hoffa case were either dead or aging fast. But the rumors, they were still alive and thriving. Journalists, former mobsters, and amateur sleuths kept chasing shadows, hoping that one of the few remaining men who knew the truth would finally break their silence. And for a brief moment, it looked like someone had. In 2001, the FBI received a new tip pointing them to a house on the northwest side of Detroit. It was modest, unassuming, owned by a Teamsters associate named Roland McMaster. Hoffa had been there before. Some believed it was where the fatal meeting had taken place. The tipster claimed that Hoffa had been murdered inside, and that the floor had been ripped up and replaced to destroy the evidence. The FBI moved in with ground-penetrating radar, cadaver dogs, and forensic experts. They excavated the floor, tested for blood, searched the yard. The investigation made headlines again. FBI closing in on Hoffa? But once again, nothing. No remains, no DNA, just another false alarm. Then came Frank Sheeran. Sheeran was a former Teamsters official and mob hitman from Pennsylvania. Known for his involvement with Russell Bufalino's crime family, Sheeran had long been rumored to be one of Hoffa's enforcers. In the early 2000s, he gave a series of interviews that became the basis for Charles Brandt's book, I Heard You Paint Houses, a mafia euphemism for murder. In it, Sheeran claimed he was the man who pulled the trigger. According to his story, Hoffa was picked up from the restaurant by men he trusted, driven to a house in Detroit. Inside, Hoffa was greeted, then shot in the back of the head by Sheeran himself. No fight, no warning, just a clean, efficient execution. His body was then cremated in a nearby facility under mob control. Sheeran's confession was chilling, specific. He named names. He described the interior of the house. He showed remorse, or something like it. And for the first time in decades, people began to wonder, was this finally the truth? The FBI took it seriously. They examined the house Sheeran identified. Tests revealed bloodstains in the floorboards, stains consistent with Sheeran's account. But the blood didn't match Hoffa's DNA. And Sheeran, facing his own death, wouldn't testify under oath. Even among law enforcement, Sheeran's account remained controversial. Some believed he exaggerated his role. Others thought he was covering for someone else. And still others believed the confession was carefully crafted, just close enough to the truth to be believable, but vague enough to protect certain names. In 2019, Martin Scorsese adapted Sheeran's story into the Netflix film The Irishman, bringing a new wave of attention to the case. Once again, Jimmy Hoffa's ghost was in the spotlight, just as elusive as ever. But Sheeran wasn't the only one talking. Over the years, other deathbed confessions trickled in, none more sensational than Philip Brother Moscato, a New Jersey mobster who claimed Hoffa was killed in Detroit, placed in a steel drum, and transported to a landfill in Jersey City controlled by the Genovese crime family. In 2020, that tip was finally investigated. The FBI searched the site beneath the Pulaski Skyway, Moscato's former landfill. Radar detected anomalies in the soil. Excavation teams moved in. Hopes ran high. But once again, nothing turned up. The site was compromised by decades of debris and water damage. If Hoffa had ever been there, the evidence was long gone. What the FBI did have, by this point, was a pattern. A man known to be dangerous, defiant, and determined to regain power, is lured to a meeting by men with known motives to eliminate him, and then disappears without a trace, with no credible alibi from any party involved. And yet no charges were ever filed. Why? Because the mafia's greatest power wasn't fear. It was silence. No one flipped. No one confessed under oath. No one gave up the body. Tony Giacalone died in 2001. Tony Provenzano died in prison in 1988. Chucky O'Brien, who spent decades under suspicion, died in 2020, still denying involvement. His relationship with Hoffa's son, James, never recovered. In the end, most of the men who likely knew what happened took that knowledge to their graves. Whether out of loyalty, fear, or discipline, it didn't matter. The result was the same, and Jimmy Hoffa remained missing, but the impact of his disappearance was undeniable. The Teamsters, once Hoffa's empire, fell under heavy federal scrutiny. For years, the union operated under government oversight to root out corruption. The mafia's influence over labor unions took a major hit. Politicians began distancing themselves from the kind of backroom deals that had defined Hoffa's era. In many ways, Hoffa's death marked the beginning of the end of traditional American organized crime. But still, no justice, no body, no closure. What's left are questions, rumors, and a legacy haunted by power, betrayal, and silence. Decades have passed. Presidents have come and gone. The mafia's grip on America has loosened. The Cold War ended. The Berlin Wall fell. But the question still echoes. Where is Jimmy Hoffa? It's more than a missing person case. More than a cold file in a dusty FBI archive. It's a story so American, so soaked in corruption, ambition, betrayal, and power. It's become myth. Jimmy Hoffa wasn't just a man. He became a symbol of labor, of organized crime, of resistance, of what happens when one man refuses to back down, even to the most dangerous people in the country. His legacy is complicated. To working men and women across the Midwest, Hoffa is still revered. His name brings up images of strength, someone who fought for the underdog, who went toe-to-toe with corporate giants and forced real change. He secured pensions, medical coverage, job security, long before it was common. To many Teamsters, he was the best leader they ever had. But to others, Hoffa was the embodiment of union corruption. A man who sold influence to the mob, used violence and fear to keep control, and funneled workers' money into mafia casinos and construction fronts. His rise was paved with intimidation and backroom deals. His fall was written the moment he tried to cross his partners in crime. That duality, hero and villain, is what keeps him frozen in American memory. Hollywood hasn't let him go. Dozens of films and documentaries have tried to unravel the Hoffa mystery. In 1992, Jack Nicholson played him in the film Hoffa, directed by Danny DeVito. In 2019, Martin Scorsese's The Irishman revived interest in Frank Sheeran's confession. Every few years, a new headline appears. Hoffa search resumes. Possible break-in case. Body may be found. And every time, we're reminded just how empty that promise is. But even without a body, Hoffa remains present. In courtrooms, his name is invoked when discussing organized crime. In union halls, he's remembered as both legend and warning. In law enforcement, his case remains a reminder that power alone isn't enough. You need proof. And for his family, his absence is a wound that never healed. James P. Hoffa, his son, served as general president of the Teamsters for over 2 decades. He never stopped searching for the truth, but he also came to understand that it might never come. In 2004, James said, "The people who know what happened are either dead or will never talk." That's the mafia code. Silence. I've made my peace with that, but that doesn't mean we'll ever forget. That's the haunting part. The men responsible got away with it. They didn't just kill Hoffa. They erased him. They knew exactly what they were doing, creating a mystery so perfect, so clean, that even the FBI, with every resource in the world, couldn't crack it. Not a single person has ever been charged in connection with Jimmy Hoffa's disappearance. No murder trial, no conviction. Just silence. There are theories, yes. In fact, at this point, there are too many. Theories ranging from plausible to absurd. Some say the CIA was involved, fearing Hoffa's potential union support for communists. Others claim Richard Nixon orchestrated it after Hoffa turned on him. Still others think Hoffa's ghost haunts the very cities he once ruled with an iron fist. But here's the truth. It doesn't matter if he's buried under a stadium, dumped in a swamp, or cremated in an incinerator. What matters is the why. Hoffa's crime wasn't theft. It wasn't violence. It wasn't corruption. Those were expected in his world. Hoffa's crime was defiance. He challenged the very power that had made him. He threatened to expose the hands that had fed him. And in the underworld, that's a death sentence. He knew the risks, but Hoffa believed he was bigger than the mob, bigger than the Teamsters, bigger than fear itself. He was wrong. That mistake cost him his life, but it also made him immortal. Jimmy Hoffa lives on, not just in memory, but in every labor negotiation, every crime thriller, every whispered conspiracy. He's the face of an era that no longer exists, but one we're still fascinated by. A time when unions were kings, when the mob walked among senators, when a single man could flip the balance of power in America, and then vanish. Completely. No trace, no confession, no closure. That's the power of Hoffa's story. It leaves us wanting. It reminds us that not every mystery gets solved, not every question gets answered, and not every giant gets a grave. So, what really happened to Jimmy Hoffa? The most likely scenario remains the simplest one. He was lured by people he trusted, murdered swiftly in a private location, and his body was disposed of by professionals who had done it before. The few who knew kept quiet. The ones who ordered it died before they could be caught. And Hoffa? He disappeared. Perfectly. And that's why we're still talking about him. Nearly 50 years later, the question still echoes. Where is Jimmy Hoffa? Maybe we'll never know. But if you found this story as gripping, mysterious, and haunting as we did, don't let it disappear too. Hit like, drop a comment with your favorite theory, and follow for more true crime deep dives that uncover the shadows behind the headlines. Because sometimes, the silence speaks louder than the truth.